At the end of January 2025, a double murder was committed in a quiet residential area of Houston, shocking the local community with its brutality and cold calculation. The crime revealed a chain of betrayals, lies, and revenge that had stretched on for years. Amelia Robinson sat on a narrow cot in her cell at the Harris County Women's Correctional Facility and stared at the cracked concrete wall. She was 34 years old, but the last year had added at least 5 years to her appearance. The lines on her face had deepened, and the first gray strands had appeared in her hair. She had served 12 months of a 2-year sentence, and another week separated her from release for good behavior. A year ago, her life had fallen apart overnight. Amelia worked as an accountant for a small office supply company owned by her husband, Steve Robinson. She kept the financial records, processed invoices, and handled tax returns. The work was routine, but Amelia took it seriously, double-checking every number. Steve always praised her for her accuracy, kissing her on the top of her head when she stayed late working on the quarterly reports. She thought they were a team. She thought they were family. Everything changed in February last year when tax agents came to the office with a search warrant. It turned out that the company had been systematically underreporting its income and evading taxes for the past 3 years. The amount of back taxes owed was more than $300,000. Amelia couldn't understand how this was possible. She had prepared all the documents herself, and all the figures had been checked and double-checked. But the investigators showed her parallel accounting records, accounts she didn't know about, and fake invoices with her electronic signature. Steve swore he knew nothing about it, that someone had hacked into the system, that he himself was in shock. But when the case went to court, it turned out that all the evidence pointed to Amelia. Her electronic signature was on all the fictitious documents. Her computer was used to create fake reports. Steve's lawyer presented correspondence in which Amelia allegedly proposed a tax minimization scheme. She shouted that it was fake, that she had never written those letters, but the examination confirmed their authenticity. Her own lawyer, inexpensive and overloaded with cases, was unable to build a defense. Steve's lawyer, on the other hand, was experienced and expensive, and he methodically dissected every word Amelia said, turning her explanations into signs of guilt. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecutor demanded 5 years, but the judge, taking into account her lack of a criminal record and references from previous employers, sentenced her to 2 years. Amelia remembered how Steve hugged her in the court hallway after the verdict and whispered that he would wait, that he would hire the best lawyers for the appeal. She believed him then. She still loved him, but the lawyers for the appeal never showed up. Steve visited her twice in the first 2 months, then called once a month, then even the calls stopped. After 6 months, Amelia stopped waiting for letters. She learned to live in the closed world of prison rules, short conversations and endless monotony. Her cellmate was Madison Garcia, a 41-year-old woman with harsh features and a surprisingly kind gaze. Madison was serving 4 years for credit card fraud and took a philosophical view of prison life. She said that here you could either break down or wait it out, like waiting out a storm. Amelia chose the latter. Over the past few weeks, they had talked a lot about the future. Amelia sat on her bunk with her legs tucked under her and talked about her plans. "You know, Maddie, I've been thinking about this every day for the last few months. I could hate him. I could make plans for revenge. I could spend my whole life trying to prove that he set me up. But what's the point? I'll be out of here in a week. I'm 34 years old. This isn't the end. It's a chance to start over. I'll find a job, maybe leave Houston, start a new life somewhere else. Revenge is poison. It destroys the person who carries it inside." Madison nodded, flipping through an old magazine. "You're right, baby. I've seen women here who have eaten themselves up inside because of what someone did to them. They leave here even more broken than when they came in. But you're strong. You'll get through this. And you're right to want to let it all go. The past is the past. You can't change it, but the future is in your hands. I even think that maybe it was all for the best." Amelia smiled weakly. If it weren't for the arrest, I would have continued living with a man who was capable of betraying me for his own benefit. I would have spent years more living under the illusion of a happy marriage. Now I see everything clearly. I am free from him, even despite these walls. That's the right attitude. Madison put down the magazine and looked at Amelia seriously. You'll find a job, meet someone normal, build a life. Trust my experience. The best revenge is a good life. When he sees that you're happy without him, that's when he'll realize what he's lost. They fell silent. The cell was quiet, except for the distant slam of a metal door. Amelia truly believed what she was saying. She had spent months convincing herself that forgiveness would set her free, that anger would only prolong her inner imprisonment. She wanted to leave here feeling light, ready to move on. The next day, as Amelia stood in line for lunch, she felt weak. First her head spun, then black spots floated before her eyes. She tried to hold on to the wall, but her legs buckled, and she fell to the cold concrete floor. She woke up in the prison infirmary, on a narrow couch under the harsh white light of the lamps. The doctor, an elderly woman with tired eyes, examined her, took her blood pressure, and asked the standard questions about her well-being. Amelia replied that she had been feeling constantly tired in recent weeks and sometimes had a fever, but she attributed this to the stress of being released. The doctor frowned and said she would take blood for tests. Amelia was kept in the infirmary for 2 days. She lay there and stared at the ceiling, listening to the nurses' voices behind the thin partition. She thought about how she would soon be released, how she would need to find a place to live, perhaps staying with her mother for the time being. She thought about how she would look for a job with a criminal record on her resume. She tried not to think about Steve. On the 3rd day, the doctor entered the room and sat down on a chair next to the couch. Her expression was professionally neutral, but Amelia saw something heavy in her eyes. Amelia, I need to tell you the results of your tests. The doctor paused, choosing her words carefully. Your HIV test came back positive. We ran a second test to confirm, and the result is the same. You have the human immunodeficiency virus. The world stopped. Amelia heard the doctor say that it wasn't a death sentence, that modern therapy allowed her to live a full life, that it was important to start treatment as soon as possible, but the words came from somewhere far away, as if through a thick layer of water. She looked at the doctor and didn't understand how this was possible. This is a mistake. Her voice was strange, hoarse. This is some kind of mistake. I can't be infected. I understand that this is a shock, the doctor said gently. But the tests have been done twice. You need to remember when you last had unprotected sex or if there were any other risk factors and blood transfusions, use of unsterile needles. Amelia slowly shook her head. The last time she had been intimate with a man was over a year ago. It was Steve, her husband. A few days before her arrest, they had spent an evening at home drinking wine, everything as usual. After her arrest, there was no one. There was no one in prison, only Steve. My husband, she whispered. The last time was my husband, a year ago before I was arrested. The doctor nodded, making notes in the chart. You will need to notify your partner about the need to get tested. It's standard procedure. Amelia wasn't listening. Images from the past were forming in her mind with frightening clarity. Steve coming home late at night, smelling of someone else's perfume. Steve turning away from her in bed, saying he was tired. His secretary, Isabella Brown, young, bright, always overly attentive to her boss. Rumors in the office that Amelia turned a blind eye to. Business trips from which Steve returned rested and distant. How many were there? How many women had passed through his bed while she believed in their marriage? He knew. He had to know. He infected her, and he knew it. Amelia lay in the infirmary and felt something break inside her. All that patiently built forgiveness, all that willingness to let go of the past, all that noble determination to start a new life. it all crumbled to dust. It was replaced by something cold and sharp that filled her chest and tightened her throat. Rage. Pure, burning rage. He took away her freedom by putting her on trial. He took away her reputation, her career, a year of her life. And now, he had taken her health. He had condemned her to lifelong treatment, to a diagnosis she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He had destroyed her completely, methodically, and hadn't even bothered to come and see the consequences of his betrayal. Amelia closed her eyes. In the darkness, Steve's face stood before her, his smug smile, his cold eyes. She remembered how he had hugged her in the court hallway, whispering soothing words. Lies. It was all a lie. Forgiveness was no longer an option. A new life was no longer a plan. There was only one thing left, and that feeling grew inside her with every passing minute, filling the void left by her shattered world. In a week, she would be free. And then Steve Robinson would get what he deserved. On the morning of January 31st, 2025, Amelia Robinson walked through the gates of the Harris County Correctional Facility and into freedom. She carried a clear plastic bag with a few personal items, a change of underwear, toiletries, a photo of her mother. She was wearing the same clothes she had been brought here in a year ago, jeans and a gray sweatshirt, now hanging loosely on her thinner frame. The weather was cloudy, the sky covered with gray clouds, and a cold wind ruffled Amelia's hair as she stood on the sidewalk in front of the prison gates. She expected to feel relief, joy, anything, but inside there was only emptiness and a dull anger that had not left her since the day she learned of the diagnosis. She had spent a whole week thinking, planning, but it was all on the surface. Deeper down sat rage, cold and patient. The bus took her to the city center. She got off at a stop that was painfully familiar. From here, it was a 15-minute walk to her mother's house. Amelia walked through streets she had known since childhood, past the grocery store where she had worked as a teenager, past the school she had graduated from 17 years ago. Everything looked familiar and foreign at the same time, as if she had returned to a place that continued to live its own life, unaware of her absence. Her mother, Gloria Robinson, lived in a small one-story house in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Houston. The house was over 40 years old. The paint on the facade was peeling, the porch needed repair, but inside, everything was clean and tidy. Gloria had worked her entire life in a textile factory, retired 3 years ago, and now lived on a modest pension. She had visited Amelia in prison twice in the past year. The journey was long, and her health was not what it used to be. When Amelia knocked on the door, her mother opened it almost immediately, as if she had been waiting by the window. Gloria was a short woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun and deep wrinkles on her dark face. She hugged her daughter silently and tightly, and Amelia felt the tension in her shoulders ease a little. Here she was safe. Here no one would judge her. They went into the kitchen. Gloria put the kettle on the stove and began to take food out of the refrigerator for lunch. Amelia sat down at the table, the same one where she had eaten breakfast before school, done her homework, and learned to cook under her mother's guidance. Everything was in its place. The oilcloth tablecloth with its faded pattern, the chicken-shaped salt shaker, the calendar on the wall. "I'm glad you're home," Gloria said without turning around. "Your room is ready. You can stay as long as you need." "Thanks, Mom." Amelia's voice was quiet. "I'll find a job, start saving, and move out soon. Don't rush." Gloria finally turned to her daughter. "You need time to recover. What you've been through, it's not easy." Amelia nodded. She hadn't told her mother about the diagnosis. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud, to see the pain and horror in Gloria's eyes. There would be time for that later. Right now, there was too much else going on. "Are you planning to see Steve?" Gloria asked cautiously as she poured tea into cups. "Maybe." Amelia picked up her cup, feeling the warmth through the ceramic. I have something to tell him. That man ruined your life, Amelia. There was weary bitterness in Gloria's voice. I never loved him, you know that. There was always something fake about him. But you loved him, and I kept quiet. And now look what he's done. He put you in prison for his crimes and didn't even bother to try to get you out. I know, Mom. Be careful with him. People like that are dangerous. They only think about themselves. Amelia finished her tea and got up from the table. I'm going for a walk. I need some fresh air after being cooped up inside for so long. Gloria didn't ask any questions. She just hugged her daughter again and told her to come back for dinner. Amelia left the house and headed toward downtown. She had made plans with Peyton Lewis, her best friend from school. They had talked on the phone several times while Amelia was in prison, and Peyton had promised to meet her on the day of her release. The meeting was set for a small cafe on Main Street, where they often sat in their previous life. The cafe was half empty. A barista sat bored behind the counter, staring at her phone, and an elderly couple sat in the corner, leisurely eating pancakes for breakfast. Peyton was already waiting at a table by the window. She stood up when she saw Amelia, and they hugged. Peyton was a tall, energetic woman with short hair and bright lipstick. She worked as a manager at an electronics store and was always the person Amelia turned to for advice. My goodness, I'm so happy to see you. Peyton stepped back and looked her friend over. You've lost weight. Did they feed you properly there? They did. I just didn't feel like eating much. Amelia sat down at the table and picked up the menu, even though she already knew what she was going to order. How are you? How's work? Same as always. My boss is still a jerk and the clients are still demanding. Peyton waved her hand. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Tell me, how are you? What are your plans now? Amelia ordered coffee and a sandwich from the waitress who approached them before answering. Look for a job, I guess. Although with a criminal record it won't be easy. Maybe I'll find something remote, freelance. I still have accounting skills, even if no one wants to hire me full-time. You'll be fine. You've always been strong. Peyton took her friend's hand. You know, I've been thinking about telling you something. I'm not sure if you should know, but it's not right to keep it from you either. Amelia felt her stomach clench. Is this about Steve? Yes. Peyton hesitated. Look, I know you got divorced while you were there. I know he treated you like a total jerk, but a lot has changed since the trial. He closed that firm, the office equipment supply company. Too much attention from the tax authorities, too many questions. But 3 months later, he opened a new one. Now it's some kind of consulting company that helps small businesses optimize their processes. I saw his ads on the internet. He has a new office in the business center and an expensive car. It looks like business is going very well. Amelia listened silently. Coffee and a sandwich were brought in, but she didn't touch the food. Her hands lay on the table, clenched into fists. That's not all. Peyton continued more quietly. About a month ago, I stumbled across his social media page. He got married, Amelia, to one of the girls who worked at his old firm. Remember Isabella Brown? She was the office manager or something like that. She was always hanging around him, bringing him coffee, staying late when he was in the office. Isabella Brown. Amelia remembered her well. 29 years old, long hair, perfect manicure, dresses that were slightly shorter and slightly more form-fitting than office etiquette required. She always smiled too broadly at Steve, always found a reason to visit his office. Amelia noticed the looks, noticed how Steve would linger his hand on Isabella's shoulder when he showed her something on the monitor. She told herself it was just a working relationship, that she was being paranoid, that Steve wouldn't take such a risk. She was a fool. Are they married? Amelia's voice was even, but inside she was burning with rage. Yes. A small ceremony judging by the photos. They bought a house in Riverside, a nice neighborhood in the north. Apparently he really does have a lot of money. And you served a year for his crimes while he built a new empire and married his mistress. Peyton fell silent, looking at Amelia with concern. "I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have told you. I just thought you had a right to know." "No, you did the right thing." Amelia picked up her coffee cup, but her hands were shaking, and she put it back down. "I was going to find him anyway. Now I just know where to look." "Amelia, listen to me." Peyton leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I understand how you feel. I understand that you're angry. But don't do anything stupid. This man has already ruined your life once. Don't let him do it again. The best thing you can do is forget about him and move on." "I can't forget." Amelia looked straight at her friend. "He didn't just set me up, Peyton. He took away much more than you know." She didn't tell her about the diagnosis. Not here, not now. But Peyton seemed to understand that something was wrong because she fell silent and just squeezed Amelia's hand. They sat for another half hour, talking about trivial things. The new TV series Peyton was watching, her nephew starting first grade, their plans for the summer. But it was all superficial, unimportant. Amelia could think of only one thing. Steve had married Isabella. He had built a new life, a new business, bought a house, while she rotted in a prison cell for his crimes. He had infected her with a deadly disease and hadn't even bothered to admit it. And now he was living happily with his new wife, probably without even thinking about her. When they said goodbye at the cafe, Amelia already knew what she was going to do next. She didn't go back to her mother's. Instead, she took the crumpled piece of paper with the address Peyton had mentioned out of her pocket. Riverside, north of the city. She had found the address in the phone book while still in prison, when she learned of the divorce. Now she boarded a bus that took her across town, past old neighborhoods and new shopping centers, to the place where the man who had ruined her life lived. Riverside was the neighborhood she and Amelia had dreamed of when they first got married. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, houses with two-car garages. Back then, it was an unattainable dream. Now Steve lived here with another woman, bought with money that should have belonged to both of them. The house was 2 stories high, with a white facade and a black roof. Bushes grew in the front yard, and a brand-new gray sedan stood in the driveway. Amelia stopped on the sidewalk across the street, staring at the house. The lights were on inside. They were home. She crossed the street and climbed the steps to the porch. Her heart was beating so loudly that it seemed audible in the silence of the evening. She raised her hand and pressed the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately. Steve Robinson stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. He was 38 years old, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a crew cut and a neat beard. When he saw Amelia, his face contorted, first with surprise, then with irritation. "Amelia? What the hell are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you." Her voice sounded calmer than she felt inside. "We have nothing to talk about. I filed for divorce a long time ago. You have no reason to show up at my house." "I have reasons." Amelia took a step forward. "You set me up, Steve. You pinned your crimes on me and sent me to prison. You ruined my life, and you infected me with HIV. She spoke the last words more quietly, but they sounded like a slap in the face. Steve blinked, then his face took on an expression of mocking contempt. "HIV? Are you seriously trying to blame me for that? Amelia, you spent a year in prison. God knows what you did there, who you slept with, what needles you used. Maybe you should blame yourself and your choices, not me." "I didn't sleep with anyone there." Amelia's voice broke into a scream. "The last time I had sex was with you, a few days before my arrest. It was you, Steve. You infected me, and you know it. I don't know anything about that." Steve crossed his arms over his chest. "And as for the trial, it's your own fault you got caught. You were too naive, too trusting. Did you think I would take responsibility for something that could be pinned on someone else? You were the perfect candidate, a trusting wife who signed all the papers without reading them. You set yourself up with your own stupidity." A figure appeared behind him in the hallway. Isabella Brown came out of the depths of the house and stopped a few steps from the door. She was dressed in a bathrobe, her long hair loose. She looked at Amelia with curiosity and slight contempt, as one might look at an annoying beggar. "Is that her?" Isabella asked quietly. "Your ex?" "Yes. She was just leaving." Steve turned to Amelia. "Listen, I'm sorry it turned out this way, but life goes on. I've built a new business, I'm happy. You should move on too and stop clinging to the past. Now get out of here. You can't just kick me out after everything you've done." Amelia felt rage boiling up inside her. "You owe me. You owe me at least an admission of what you've done." "I don't owe you anything." Steve's voice became harsh. "You served your time for your crimes. It's your fault that you were stupid enough to sign the papers without checking them. It's your fault that you caught some kind of disease. Don't come here with your accusations anymore. Ex-cons don't belong in a decent neighborhood, understand?" He stepped back and started to close the door. Amelia tried to stick her foot in the doorway, but Steve was stronger. The door slammed shut with a loud click of the lock. "Get out of here, or I'll call the police," he shouted from behind the door. "Don't you dare come near my house again." Amelia stood on the porch, staring at the closed door. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was ragged. Inside the house, she heard laughter, probably Isabella saying something and Steve responding. They were laughing at her. They had kicked her out like a pesky beggar, and now they were laughing as they returned to their happy lives. Amelia turned and walked down the steps. She walked down the quiet street of Riverside, past well-kept houses and expensive cars, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tears of rage, humiliation, helplessness. Steve didn't just refuse to admit his guilt. He made her look like a fool, a weak and naive woman who was to blame for everything that had happened to her. The bus took her back across town. Amelia looked out the window at the lights passing by and thought about how easily Steve had dismissed her, how easily he had closed the door in her face. To him, she no longer existed. She was the past he had gotten rid of, like one gets rid of unnecessary things. When she returned to her mother's house, it was late. Gloria was asleep, and only the nightlight in the hallway was on. Amelia went to her old room, closed the door, and lay down on the bed without undressing. She lay in the dark and cried quietly, biting her pillow so her mother wouldn't hear. She cried from pain, from hurt, from the realization that there would be no justice, that Steve would continue to live in his beautiful house with his new wife, while she would be left with a ruined life, a diagnosis, and a criminal record. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of pain and tears, something else began to form. A cold decision. If justice would not come on its own, if the law would not punish him, if the world allowed people like Steve to destroy other people's lives with impunity, then she herself would create that justice. So she herself would become the force that would give him what he deserved. Amelia stopped crying. She lay in the dark with her eyes open, thinking about what she had to do. The next morning, Amelia woke up with a clear head and a firm decision. She no longer cried. The tears were gone, replaced only by a cold certainty of what had to be done. She got up, took a shower, and dressed in dark jeans and a black jacket. Gloria was already in the kitchen making breakfast, but Amelia refused to eat, saying she had no appetite. She drank only coffee and told her mother that she was going to look for a job and meet with potential employers. Gloria didn't ask any unnecessary questions. Amelia left the house around 10 in the morning. She had a plan, and the first item on it was to find a person she hadn't seen in over 15 years. Javier Perez had gone to the same school as her and sat at the desk next to hers in math class. Back then, he was a quiet guy with good grades who dreamed of going to college, but life had other plans. His father was imprisoned for drug trafficking, his mother died, and Javier ended up on the streets at the age of 17. Amelia had heard bits and pieces about him over the years. He had become the person people went to when they needed something. Guns, fake documents, stolen goods. Javier knew people and knew how to solve certain problems. She found him in the same neighborhood where they had grown up. An old quarter on the eastern edge of the city, where most of the houses were in need of repair, and groups of young men gathered on street corners, not particularly hiding their activities. Amelia knew that Javier usually spent his time at a bar on 5th Street. She arrived there around noon. The bar was dark and smelled of stale tobacco smoke, despite the ban on smoking in public places. Behind the counter stood a bartender with tattoos on his arms, wiping glasses and watching TV. In the corner, 2 men sat at a table playing cards. One of them was Javier. He had changed since she last saw him. He was bulkier, had a scar above his left eyebrow, and his hair was cut short. He looked up when Amelia entered and stared at her in confusion for a few seconds, before recognizing her. "Amelia Robinson?" He put down his cards and stood up. "Damn, how long has it been?" "A long time." She walked over to the table. "I need to talk to you. In private." Javier looked at his playing partner and nodded toward the exit. The man gathered his cards and left without saying a word. Amelia sat down across from Javier. "I heard you served time," Javier said, studying her face. "Tax evasion, right? Was it hard?" "Yes." Amelia didn't want to go into details. "Javier, I need your help. I need to buy something." "What exactly?" "A gun. Nothing fancy. Just something that works and can't be traced." Javier leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. His face remained impassive. "This is serious, Amelia. Do you understand what you're getting yourself into?" "I do." "Do you have the money?" "Yes. How much do you need?" "500 in cash. No questions asked, no traces left behind." Amelia opened her purse and took out $500 bills. It was the last of the money she had saved before her arrest, kept by her mother. She placed the bills on the table. Javier took them, counted them, and put them in his pocket. "Wait here. 10 minutes." He left through the back door. Amelia sat at the table and watched the TV screen above the bar, which was showing some daytime program. The bartender glanced at her curiously a few times, but did not approach. Time dragged on slowly. Amelia felt her heart beating steadily and heavily in her chest. She thought about how, in a few hours, her life would change forever. There would be no turning back. Javier returned 12 minutes later. He sat down opposite her and placed a small package wrapped in an old newspaper on the table. 9mm, full magazine, 8 rounds. The serial number has been filed off. Be careful with it. And Amelia, I don't know what you're going to do, but think twice. One wrong move and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Or worse. I've already thought it through. Amelia took the package and hid it in her bag. Thanks, Javier. She stood up and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. Javier was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Maybe it was concern, maybe it was regret. But he didn't say anything, and Amelia went out into the street. She spent the rest of the day at her mother's house, locked in her room. She sat on her bed, holding the gun in her hands, studying its weight, the cold heaviness of the metal. It was a simple weapon, without frills, but functional. She checked the magazine, made sure the bullets were in place. Then she put the gun back in her bag and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She waited for the evening. Gloria knocked on the door around 6, asking if Amelia would be having dinner. Amelia replied that she wasn't hungry, that she was just tired and wanted to sleep. Her mother didn't insist. The house fell silent. Amelia continued to lie there, listening to the clock on the wall, ticking away the minutes. When it got dark, she got up, got dressed, and quietly left the house through the back door. Gloria was watching TV in the living room and didn't hear her daughter leave. Amelia took the bus to Riverside again. The trip took 40 minutes. She sat by the window and watched the city lights pass by. There was a gun in her bag. In her jacket pocket was a rock she had picked up by the road near her mother's house. She felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if everything that was happening was a dream or someone else's story. When she got off the bus in Riverside, it was around 8 o'clock in the evening. The streets were empty and quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. She walked toward Steve's house, keeping to the shadows of the trees. The lights were on in the first-floor windows. They were home. Amelia stopped in front of the house, took the rock out of her pocket, and threw it at the large panoramic window of the living room. The glass shattered with a loud clang, and shards scattered across the lawn. She stepped back into the shadows and waited. Less than a minute later, the front door swung open. Steve ran out onto the porch in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking around. He saw the broken window and cursed. "What the hell? Who's there?" Amelia stepped out of the shadows, her hand raised with a gun pointed directly at Steve. The streetlight illuminated her face, and Steve froze when he recognized her. "Amelia, are you out of your mind? Shut up and go inside." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Steve raised his hands and slowly turned toward the door. Amelia followed him, keeping the gun level with his back. They entered the house. Isabella was standing in the living room, her face pale with fear. She stared at Amelia with wide eyes. "Steve, what's going on?" "This is my ex-wife," Steve replied, his voice trembling. "Amelia, listen, don't do anything stupid. Put the gun down. We can talk this out. Sit on the couch." Amelia pointed the barrel toward the furniture. "You too, Isabella." They sat down next to each other on the leather couch. Amelia stood opposite them, holding the gun with both hands. She could feel the adrenaline rushing through her veins, but her hands were steady and her gaze was clear. "You have to confess everything, Steve. Right now. Tell me how you set me up, how you forged the documents, how you made me sign the papers without explaining what was in them. Tell me about your mistresses. How many did you have while we were married?" Steve licked his lips. His eyes darted between Amelia and the gun. "Amelia, you don't understand. It was business. The tax authorities were pressuring me, threatening to shut down the company. I needed a way out. You were a convenient solution. You trusted me. You signed everything I gave you. It was easy. Go on. How many women were there?" He was silent for a few seconds, then his face contorted into a twisted grimace that resembled a smirk. "A lot. I didn't count. Secretaries, clients, random encounters in bars. I liked the variety. You were boring, Amelia. Predictable. I don't regret anything. You want to hear the truth? Here it is. I used you because I could, because you were stupid enough to let me." Amelia felt something break inside her. She looked at the man she had lived with for 5 years, the man she had married, the man she had loved, and all she saw was a monster, shameless and smug, even in the face of a gun. "Do you really think you're capable of pulling the trigger?" Steve continued, his voice tinged with mockery. "You're too weak for that. You've always been weak. You'll stand here and threaten us, but you won't." "Does she really think she can scare us?" Isabella interrupted, contempt in her voice. "A former convict with a gun. Probably picked it up in prison from her friends. Steve, call the police. Let them take this." Amelia pulled the trigger. The shot rang out in the silence of the house like an explosion. Isabella jerked, her eyes widened in shock, and she fell sideways onto the sofa. A red stain spread across her robe. She twitched for a few seconds, making wheezing sounds, then fell silent. Steve stared at his wife's body, his face turning gray. He slowly shifted his gaze to Amelia, and for the first time ever, she saw real fear in his eyes. "Amelia, God, you killed her. You really—" "Yes." Her voice was calm. "And now you understand that you're next." "Wait!" Steve raised his hands, his voice breaking into a cry. "Wait, don't! I'll give you everything! I have money, a lot of money! Cash, upstairs, $100,000! It's all yours! Just don't kill me! Please!" Amelia looked at him. She saw him trembling, tears streaming down his face. She thought about how this man had destroyed her life completely and irrevocably. He had taken her freedom, her health, her future, and now he was begging for mercy, offering money, as if that could change anything. "It's too late, Steve." She fired twice. The first bullet hit him in the chest, the second in the stomach. Steve fell from the sofa to the floor, his hands clutching his wounds convulsively. He tried to say something, but only blood came out of his mouth. Amelia stood over him and watched as the life drained from his eyes. It took less than a minute. When it was over, the house was deathly quiet. Amelia lowered the gun. She felt empty, but not remorseful. She had done what she had to do. She went upstairs and found the bedroom. The safe was in the closet, small, built into the wall. She searched the room and found the key in a nightstand drawer. She opened the safe. Inside were stacks of bills, neatly tied with rubber bands. Amelia counted it. $98,000. Next to it was a box of gold jewelry, rings, bracelets, chains. She took everything, putting the money and jewelry in a sports bag she found in the closet. She went downstairs, passing the bodies without looking back. In the hallway, she wiped the doorknob with the edge of her jacket, even though she knew it was almost useless. Her fingerprints were everywhere. But she didn't care. She knew she had a few hours, maybe a day, before the bodies were discovered. That should be enough. Amelia left the house, closing the door behind her. The night was cold and quiet. She walked down the empty street with the bag of money on her shoulder, each step taking her further away from the scene of the crime. She didn't know where she would go. Maybe to another state, maybe to Mexico. The money would allow her to disappear, to start over somewhere where she wouldn't be found. She stopped at the corner of the street and turned around. Steve and Isabella's house stood in silence, the lit windows on the first floor shining in the darkness. Inside, 2 people lay dead. Outside, a new life was beginning. Amelia Robinson turned and walked further into the night, and the city swallowed her up.